What would you do if a billionaire in
Please help
Chicago
us.
walked out of a routine checkup
He's not
and heard a
breathing.
little girl screaming, "Please, somebody
Is it
save my
enough?
brother?" A
We will do our
7-year-old
best.
clutching her dying baby brother. No insurance, no family left, just desperation. Would you step in or walk away? This story will shake you, move you, and maybe even change the way you see family forever. If you've ever witnessed a moment like this, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The waiting room at St. Mary's Medical Center buzzed with fluorescent light and muffled voices. A TV in the corner ran a morning talk show no one was watching. Alexander Reed sat in a chair near the wall, his phone balanced in one hand, a leather briefcase at his feet. 32, billionaire, CEO of Reed Technologies. On paper, he was the American dream. In truth, he felt nothing. He came here once a year for a checkup, not out of concern for his health, but because his assistant insisted. His body was fine. His heart was another story. Then came the cry that cut the sterile air in half. "Please, somebody help me, please." Alexander's head snapped up. Across the lobby, standing on shaking legs, was a girl no older than 7. Her jeans were ripped, her hair tangled, her small hands clutched around a limp bundle. It wasn't a bundle, it was a boy, 3 years old, maybe 4. His little chest rose in weak gasps. Lips gray-blue, eyes closed. The girl's tears streaked down her cheeks as she screamed again. "He's my brother. Please don't let him die." The waiting room froze. A receptionist dropped her pen. Nurses rushed forward, one lifting the boy into her arms, the other signaling for a crash cart. The girl tried to follow, but a security guard blocked her. "No!" she wailed. "I need to stay with him. That's my brother." Something inside Alexander cracked. He saw himself years ago, a 10-year-old boy begging doctors to save his little sister, Sarah. She had died from leukemia because his parents couldn't pay for treatment. That helplessness had burned into him, driving him to build an empire. He had sworn never to feel powerless again, and now, a little girl was begging with the same desperation. Alexander rose, leaving his phone forgotten on the chair. He crossed the room, crouching down so he could look her in the eye. "Hey," he said gently. "What's your name?" She sniffed, tears dripping onto her shirt. "Grace. Grace Miller. That's my brother Daniel. He's all I have left." "All you have left?" His voice faltered. She nodded. "Our parents died in a car crash 6 months ago. It's just me and Daniel now. He got sick. I tried to take care of him, but he kept getting worse. The shelter lady said he needed a hospital, but..." Her voice broke. "I don't have money. I'll work. I'll clean. I'll do anything. Just don't let him die." "No." Alexander's chest tightened. This child was negotiating like an adult, carrying the weight of survival. The double doors swung open. A doctor in green scrubs appeared, his expression serious. "Are you family?" he asked. "I'm his sister," Grace said quickly. "His only family." The doctor knelt to meet her gaze. "Grace, your brother is very sick. He has acute lymphoblastic leukemia, a kind of blood cancer. He needs immediate treatment." He paused, glancing down at the clipboard. "But without insurance or payment arrangements, I'll pay for it." The words left Alexander's mouth before his brain could catch up. He stood, pulling his wallet from his jacket. "Whatever it takes. Do every test. Get the best specialists. Start now." The doctor blinked. "Sir, this treatment can cost hundreds of thousands, possibly millions over the next few years." "I don't care," Alexander said firmly. "Run the charges through. Money is not an obstacle." He pressed his platinum card into the doctor's hand. Grace stared at him, wide-eyed. "You mean it?" He looked down at her tear-stained face. "I mean it. Your brother will get the best care possible." She flung her arms around his waist, sobbing into his expensive suit. "Thank you. Thank you." Awkwardly, he patted her back, his own eyes burning. He hadn't allowed himself to cry since Sarah, but the memory flooded him now. Helplessness, loss, guilt. Maybe this time, he could keep a promise he once couldn't. Minutes later, Daniel was rushed into the oncology wing. Grace tried to follow, but the guard stopped her again. "No, I have to be with him." Alexander stepped forward. "It's okay. They're helping him. He's safe." She looked up at him, panic in her eyes. "What if they take him away? They wanted to split us before. Put him in one foster home. Me in another. I can't let that happen." He crouched again, lowering his voice. "Listen to me, Grace. Nobody is taking him away. Not while I'm here. Do you understand?" Her trembling lips pressed together. Slowly, she nodded. A while later, the doctor returned. "We've stabilized him with fluids and oxygen. We'll start chemotherapy." But he hesitated. "He's severely malnourished. His immune system is already weak. We're fighting cancer and malnutrition at once." Grace's face collapsed. "I tried," she whispered. "I gave him food at the shelter. Sometimes we didn't have enough." The doctor touched her small shoulder gently. "You've been brave, sweetheart. This is not your fault." Alexander's jaw clenched. His city, his country, overflowing with wealth. Yet 2 children were starving on shelter food. He had made billions, while children like them fell through the cracks. The nurse brought paperwork. "Mr. Reed, are you the guardian?" He hesitated. "I'm a family friend, helping out." The nurse nodded and left. Grace sat stiffly in a plastic chair, her eyes glued to the doors where Daniel had disappeared. "Grace," Alexander said softly, sitting beside her. "Tell me about your parents." Her lip trembled. "Dad worked as an engineer downtown. Mom stayed home with us. They were driving back from his job when a truck ran a red light. The police said they died instantly." She swallowed hard. "After that, Child Services wanted to split us up. But I couldn't let them. So we ran. We stayed at shelters. I took care of him. I always take care of him." Pride and heartbreak swelled in Alexander's chest. This little girl was carrying the weight of the world, and somehow, still standing. His phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, but habit won. A message from his head of security flashed across the screen. "Boss. Initial search shows Thomas Miller Grace's father was a senior engineer at Reed Technologies. Accident file is flagged suspicious. Full report incoming." Alexander's pulse quickened. Grace leaned against the chair, her legs dangling, eyes locked on the closed doors. She didn't notice the color draining from his face. Her father had worked for him, at his company. And the crash that killed him and his wife wasn't just a crash, it was suspicious. Alexander's stomach twisted. Saving Daniel was no longer the only fight. What had Thomas Miller discovered? And had someone made sure he would never reveal it? The corridors of Street. Mary's hummed with machines and low voices, a constant reminder of how fragile life could be. Alexander Reed walked beside Grace, who held his hand with a grip that felt far too strong for a 7-year-old. Every step she took, her head kept swiveling toward the double doors, where Daniel had been wheeled away. Hours dragged like days. Finally, Dr. Evelyn Brooks returned. Her face, professional, but weary. "Mr. Reed," she said softly. "We've stabilized Daniel for now. He's resting. We've started him on chemotherapy. But there was always a but. But his body is dangerously weak. The malnutrition is working against us. He'll need constant monitoring, specialized care, and full commitment from a guardian." Grace squeezed Alexander's hand so tightly it almost hurt. "I'll stay with him," she blurted. "I'll do everything. I promised Mommy and Daddy I'd take care of him." Dr. Brooks knelt so she could look Grace in the eye. "Sweetheart, You've already done more than most adults could. You saved him by bringing him here. But this fight is bigger than you alone. Alexander cleared his throat, his voice rougher than he intended. He won't be fighting alone anymore. Not while I'm here. Grace's dark eyes flicked to him, hopeful, uncertain, searching for cracks in his promise. She had learned too young that adults often said one thing and did another. Later, when Daniel was settled into a small pediatric oncology room, Grace climbed onto a chair beside his bed. She kept her tiny fingers laced through his, whispering little reassurances into his ear, though the boy was unconscious. Alexander watched from the doorway, his heart heavy. Grace was 7, but she carried herself like someone much older, guarded, cautious, but still clinging to the belief that love could keep her brother alive. "Mr. Reed?" Grace's voice startled him. She was staring at him, her hand still on Daniel's. "Can I show you something?" He stepped inside. Of course. She slid off the chair and went to her battered backpack, shoved under the bed. The fabric was frayed, the zipper bent. She dug into a hidden side pocket and pulled out something small and black. A USB drive. "My daddy gave me this," she whispered, "the night before the crash. He said, 'Grace, if something ever happens to Mommy and me, keep this safe. Don't tell anyone unless you really trust them.'" Her eyes searched his face. "I trust you." The weight of those words sank deep. Alexander slowly held out his hand. She placed the drive in his palm, her tiny fingers trembling. "I kept it hidden, even at the shelter. I never told anybody." Alexander closed his fingers around the device. "You did the right thing." What could Thomas Miller, a mid-level engineer at Reed Technologies, have found that made him fear for his life? And now, by sheer twist of fate, his daughter had handed that secret to the company's CEO. Alexander slipped the drive into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Grace. I'll look at it later." Her face tightened. "Will it help save Daniel?" "God." Her faith cut him open. He knelt beside her. "Maybe. Maybe it'll explain what happened to your dad. Either way, I promise you, you and Daniel are not alone anymore." Her small arms wrapped around his neck before he could say more. For the first time in years, Alexander felt like someone needed him for more than his money, his influence, or his reputation. She needed him as a protector. That night, Alexander didn't go home. He couldn't. He found an empty office in the hospital wing, logged into a secure laptop, and inserted the USB. Files opened spreadsheets, emails, technical schematics. His blood ran cold as he scrolled. Project Titan. It was one of Reed Technologies' crown jewels, a military defense contract worth billions. But these files showed quality control reports falsified, substandard materials substituted, safety tests skipped. Components designed for battlefield systems would fail under stress. Soldiers' lives were at risk. And the chain of emails, each one worse than the last. Thomas Miller had raised concerns. He had written to his supervisor, to his division head. And then came the reply that made Alexander's stomach twist. Temporary cost. Saving measures approved. Consider this from the top. Some things are bigger than one man's conscience. Think of your family. Faye. E.C. Signed, Victor Hayes, Vice President of Manufacturing. Alexander sat back, his chest tight. Victor Hayes. A man he had promoted. A man he trusted. And Thomas Miller, loyal engineer, had tried to blow the whistle. 2 weeks later, he and his wife were dead. A truck with failed brakes. A shell corporation, dissolved days later. This wasn't coincidence. This was murder. As Alexander stared at the glowing screen, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. Walk away while you still can. The kids are collateral. You can't afford." His hands trembled not from fear, but fury. Someone knew he had the drive. Someone was watching. He dialed his head of security immediately. "Robert, listen carefully. I want 24/7 detail at Street Mary's pediatric oncology floor. 2 kids, Grace and Daniel Miller. Nobody goes near them unless I clear it personally. Understood, Robert replied. What's going on, Alex? Someone killed their father, and now they want to finish the job. The next morning, Grace was curled up in a chair, her head resting on Daniel's hospital bed. He stirred, his little hand twitching against hers. Alexander leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion pulling at him. He should have felt rage, betrayal, fear. But what he felt was strangely simple. Resolve. Dr. Brooks found him in the hall. Mr. Reed, Daniel's holding steady for now, but he'll need weeks, maybe months, of intensive treatment. This won't be a sprint. It's a marathon. I'm not going anywhere, Alexander said firmly. The doctor studied him, clearly skeptical. Most benefactors disappear after the first news cycle. Don't make promises you can't keep. He met her eyes. I buried a sister because we couldn't afford treatment. I'm not burying another child. For a rare moment, Dr. Brooks' stern face softened. Then maybe you're exactly what those kids need. That evening, Grace pulled her knees to her chest on the windowsill. Snow fell softly outside. Mr. Reed, she whispered, do you believe in angels? He paused. Why do you ask? Because sometimes, when it's really quiet, I think Mommy and Daddy are still with me, like they're watching, telling me not to give up. She looked at him with those enormous, searching eyes. Do you think they sent you? He had no answer. For years, he had believed his own life was built on drive, ambition, and ruthless choices. But now, looking at this child, he wondered if fate had stepped in. Maybe they did, he said softly. Grace leaned her forehead against the glass. I hope so. Because I don't know what will happen if you go away too. He swallowed hard. I'm not going anywhere, Grace. 2 days later, Alexander returned briefly to Reed Tower. The building's glass facade reflected the gray Chicago sky. He carried the USB in his inside pocket, close to his chest, like a weapon. His assistant met him in the lobby, nervous. Mr. Reed, Victor Hayes has been asking questions. He knows you've been reviewing old employee files, including Thomas Miller's. Alexander forced his expression neutral. Tell him nothing. Upstairs, in his corner office, he opened his laptop again, digging deeper into the files. More incriminating evidence surfaced. Offshore payments, coded memos, contract manipulations. The fraud was massive. Then his office phone rang, a smooth, cold voice on the other end. Alex, you've wandered into something that doesn't concern you. Close the file. Walk away. Or Grace and Daniel will vanish like their parents. Alexander's knuckles whitened around the receiver. Touch them, and I'll bury you. The line went dead. That night, back at the hospital, Grace was drawing with crayons on printer paper Alexander had brought. She held up a picture, a stick-figure man, with 2 children beside him. This is us, she said proudly. Me, Daniel, and you. You're holding our hands so we don't fall. His throat tightened. That's beautiful, Grace. Her small smile faded as she studied him. But why do you look so sad? Because he had just discovered her father was murdered. Because people were still watching them. Because the empire he had built was rotting from within. But he only said, because the world hasn't been kind enough to you, and I want to change that. She slipped the drawing into his jacket pocket. Then keep it safe. So you remember. At 2:47 a.m., Alexander jolted awake in the hospital chair. The fire alarm shrieked overhead. Smoke curled under the door. Grace shot up, coughing. What's happening? Alexander grabbed Daniel, still hooked to IV lines, and pulled Grace close. He tried the door. Locked. From the outside, the smell of gasoline hit his nose. This wasn't an accident. Stay with me, he ordered, voice low but urgent. He shoved the bed against the window, smashed the glass with his elbow. Cold Chicago air blasted in. Below them, 4 stories down, the parking lot gleamed with snow. Behind him, smoke thickened. Grace coughed harder. Daniel whimpered weakly. And then, from the hallway, voices low, deliberate. "They're inside. Finish it." The shriek of the fire alarm was deafening, a scream of metal and electricity that rattled the walls. Smoke thickened by the second, curling in gray fingers across the ceiling. Alexander pressed Daniel tightly against his chest, his other arm pulling Grace close. Her small frame trembled as she coughed, wide eyes darting to the black smoke pouring under the locked door. This was no accident. This was a trap. "Stay calm," Alexander whispered, though his heart thundered in his chest. He kicked the bed against the window, climbed on top, and smashed the glass with his elbow. Shards rained onto the parking lot 4 stories below, where snow reflected the orange glow of flames spreading down the hall. The frigid Chicago air whipped inside, sharp and merciless, but it carried hope oxygen. Grace clutched his sleeve, her voice breaking. "We can't jump. It's too high." "I won't let you fall," Alexander said, his voice steel. "But we can't stay here." Behind the door, heavy boots thudded. Muffled voices barked orders. Then the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against the lock. Someone was overriding it. "They're inside. Finish it." Alexander's blood froze. Whoever they were, they hadn't come to rescue. They had come to kill. He scanned the building's exterior. Just outside the broken window, a narrow ledge jutted no wider than 8 inches, running along the side of the hospital. Dangerous, but their only chance. "Grace," he said, his voice urgent but steady. "Look at me. You're going to be brave. You're going to walk with me on that ledge. Hold my hand. Don't look down. Can you do that?" Grace swallowed hard, then nodded, her small face streaked with tears and soot. "For Daniel. I can do it." Pride surged through him. This child was fiercer than most adults he knew. He swung one leg out, gripping the frame with his free hand. Daniel cradled against his chest. The icy ledge felt like glass beneath his shoe. Wind clawed at his coat. Below, the parking lot yawned like a frozen abyss. "Come on, sweetheart," he urged. Grace pressed against the wall, inching onto the ledge. She clutched his arm with white knuckles, her breath quick and shallow. Behind them, the hospital door burst open. Figures in dark coats stormed inside, their outlines blurred by smoke. One of them shouted, "They're on the ledge!" Bullets cracked. Glass splintered inches from Alexander's head. He ducked, shielding Daniel with his body. Grace screamed, but kept moving. Her little shoes, scraping against stone. "Almost there," Alexander growled. 30 feet ahead, another window glowed with light. He prayed. It wasn't locked. Step by agonizing step, they edged forward, the Chicago wind howling like a predator. Daniel whimpered against his chest, his tiny hand clutching Alexander's shirt. Grace muttered to herself, "Don't fall, don't fall," as if chanting could keep gravity at bay. Finally, the next window loomed. Alexander swung his elbow into the glass. Once, twice. It cracked. A third strike shattered it. Inside now. Grace scrambled through first, collapsing onto the tile floor. Alexander followed, hoisting Daniel gently through the frame before climbing in himself. They tumbled into a darkened office filled with filing cabinets and abandoned desks. Behind them, the shooters cursed, their voices carried by the wind. They couldn't follow along the ledge easily. Not with fire spreading and alarms blaring. But it was only a matter of time. Alexander pulled the blinds shut and pressed his back against the wall, chest heaving. For a moment, the world narrowed to Grace's ragged breathing, Daniel's faint whimper, and the pounding of his own heart. Then he heard footsteps pounding down the hall. Not just one set many. The office door rattled. Alexander braced, ready to use the nearest chair as a weapon, when a voice shouted from the other side. "Mr. Reed! Robert! Open up!" Relief surged so strong, his knees almost buckled. He yanked the door open. His head of security, Robert Kane, burst in with 2 armed men in tactical gear. "Boss, thank God," Robert said, his eyes scanning the smoke-stained room. "You okay?" Alexander shoved Daniel into his arms. "Get him out. Grace too." Robert nodded, lifting Daniel gently. "Medical teams on standby." He motioned to one of the men. "Take the girl," but Grace clung to Alexander, refusing to let go. "No. I'm staying with him." Alexander crouched, gripping her shoulders. "It's okay. They'll take you to Daniel. I'll be right behind you." Her lip trembled. But finally she nodded, letting one of the guards scoop her up. Her eyes never left his until the hallway swallowed her. Robert turned back, his face grim. "This wasn't an accident, was it?" Alexander shook his head, his voice like iron. "No. They locked the door. They set the fire. And they wanted us dead." Robert's jaw tightened. "Who?" Alexander thought of the USB burning a hole in his pocket. "I have a good idea. But right now, those kids come first." By dawn, the fire was extinguished. Official reports called it a localized electrical malfunction. But Alexander knew better. So did Robert. And so did the FBI agent, waiting in the hospital lobby. Carla Ramirez was younger than Alexander, expected mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of quiet authority that silenced a room. She flashed her badge as he approached. "Mr. Reed," she said, her tone brisk but calm. "I'm Agent Ramirez. I read your message about Project Titan and Thomas Miller." Alexander glanced around. Nurses bustled. Reporters hovered just outside the glass doors. "Too many ears." "Not here," he muttered. "Somewhere private." She nodded. Minutes later, they were seated in a secured conference room. Alexander placed the USB on the table and pushed it toward her. "Everything's on here. Fraud, falsified safety reports, offshore accounts, and murder." Her brow furrowed as she scrolled through the files on her laptop. With each passing second, her face darkened. "This is bad," she whispered. "Really bad. If this goes public, Reed Technologies collapses. Military contracts revoked. Billions lost. And your board." "I don't care about the board," Alexander snapped. "I care about those kids. Their father tried to expose this. He was silenced. Now, someone wants to silence them too." Ramirez's eyes sharpened. "Then you've got more than corporate fraud. You've got a conspiracy with bodies attached." He leaned forward, his voice low and fierce. "So, tell me who's behind this." "Victor Hayes signed the emails, but he's not smart enough to orchestrate something this big." The agent hesitated. "We've been watching Hayes for months. He's corrupt, yes. But you're right. He's just a cog. Someone higher is pulling the strings." Alexander's pulse pounded. "Who?" She closed the laptop, her expression unreadable. "We don't have proof yet. But we will. And until then, you and those children are targets. You need to disappear for a while." That night, in a safehouse outside Madison, Alexander tucked Grace and Daniel into a small bedroom with twin beds. Grace insisted on sleeping in the chair beside her brother, her hand still curled around his. "Do you think they'll find us here?" she asked in a whisper. Alexander crouched beside her. "Not if I can help it. You're safe now." Her eyes shimmered in the dim light. "You promise?" He swallowed hard. "With my life." She studied him for a long moment, then whispered, "I believe you." For the first time in years, Alexander felt the weight of trust, not from shareholders, not from employees, but from a child who had lost everything. And he silently vowed not to betray it. But even as he sat there, watching Grace finally drift into exhausted sleep, his phone buzzed with a new text. "He has the drive. Watch him. If he doesn't hand it over soon, make another accident happen." No name, no number. Just a warning and a death sentence waiting to be carried out. The Safehouse sat on a quiet street outside Madison, Wisconsin. A modest two-story home with plain curtains and no markings. It looked like any other family residence on the block. That was the point. It was meant to blend in, to disappear in the ordinary. Inside, however, the air buzzed with unease. Armed marshals rotated shifts outside, their SUVs parked discreetly 2 blocks away. The hum of their radios occasionally drifted through the walls, reminders that danger still circled like wolves. Alexander Reed sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the glow of his phone screen harsh against the darkness. The latest text still burned in his mind. He has the drive. Watch him. If he doesn't hand it over soon, make another accident happen. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion pressing into his bones. He could handle boardroom betrayals, hostile takeovers, billion-dollar lawsuits, but this threats against children cut deeper than any business war. A soft sound broke the silence. Small footsteps padded across the hardwood floor. "Mr. Reed?" He looked up. Grace stood in the doorway, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit she had dug out of a donation bin earlier. The sleeves of her oversized pajama top swallowed her hands. Her dark eyes were wide, shining in the dim kitchen light. "You're still awake," she said softly. "So are you." He tried to smile. "Can't sleep?" She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire, the smoke, Daniel coughing." She hugged the rabbit tighter. "I thought we were going to die." Alexander pulled out the chair beside him. "Come here." She climbed up, tucking her knees against her chest. For a while, they just sat there in silence. The refrigerator humming quietly in the corner. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us. You're rich, important. You could be anywhere else." Her words were innocent, but they cut to the truth he had been avoiding. He stared at the dark window, his reflection fractured by faint streaks of frost. "When I was your age," he began slowly, "I had a little sister. Her name was Sarah. She was 8 when she got sick. Leukemia. Like Daniel. My parents tried everything, but we didn't have the money for treatment. Insurance denied us. I sat beside her bed every night, listening to her cry, holding her hand while she got weaker. And then one morning, she was gone." His throat tightened. He hadn't spoken these words aloud in years. "I swore to myself that I would never feel that helpless again. I worked. I fought. I built an empire so big I thought money could shield me from loss. But it didn't bring her back. Nothing could." He glanced at Grace, whose eyes brimmed with tears. "Then I heard your voice in that hospital lobby. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I could rewrite the ending. Maybe I could save someone this time." "Oh," Grace sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "So, you're helping us because of your sister?" "In part," he admitted. "But now, it's more than that. Grace, you remind me of her. Brave, stubborn, refusing to let go even when the world is cruel. And Daniel, he's the same age she was when she died. I can't explain it, but being here with you feels like fate." She was quiet for a long moment, her small fingers tracing the scarred surface of the kitchen table. Then she whispered, "Will you be our family?" Alexander's chest tightened. "Family? You saved Daniel. You're protecting us. You sit with me when I'm scared. That's what family does." Her voice trembled. "I don't want to lose him, and I don't want to be alone anymore. So, will you be our family?" Her words struck harder than any business deal, any boardroom betrayal. This child, who had lost everything, was offering him the one thing he thought he'd never have again. Belonging. He leaned forward, resting his hands over hers. "Grace, I can't replace your parents. They'll always be a part of you. But if you'll let me, I'll fight for you and Daniel. I'll protect you both, no matter what. For as long as I live." A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't say anything, She simply leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. He held her tightly, his throat burning, realizing that for the first time in decades, someone needed him not for his wealth or his power, but simply for his love. The next morning, Daniel stirred awake in the spare bedroom, his frail body tangled in blankets. Grace sat cross-legged beside him, reading from a picture book Alexander had brought. "Mommy used to read to us like this," she told him quietly. "With all the funny voices." Daniel's small laugh was raspy but real. "Do funny voice." "Ah." Grace exaggerated a silly accent, making her brother giggle until he coughed. She rubbed his back gently, her eyes tender. From the doorway, Alexander watched. For the first time since the fire, a flicker of hope warmed the room. Later, over breakfast, the front door opened. Agent Carla Ramirez stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. She looked tired, but determined. "Mr. Reed," she said, setting her laptop bag on the table. "We've dug deeper into Project Titan. Victor Hayes isn't the mastermind. He's just a middleman. The orders came from higher up, someone with authority over the division." Alexander leaned forward. "Who?" Ramirez hesitated. "The paper trail leads to someone close to you. Someone with access to both financial channels and military contracts." He felt his stomach knot. "Say the name." "Charles Reed," she said finally. "Your uncle." The words hit like a physical blow. Charles, his father's brother. The man who had mentored him after his parents' deaths. The man he trusted more than anyone in the company. "That's impossible," Alexander muttered. "He retired 2 years ago." "Retired to the Cayman Islands," Ramirez corrected. "But his fingerprints are all over Titan Holdings, the shell corporation siphoning millions from these contracts. We believe he ordered Thomas Miller silenced." Alexander sank back in his chair, his pulse roaring in his ears. His own blood, his own family. Grace looked between them, confused but worried. "What does that mean?" Alexander forced his voice steady. "It means the man behind your parents' death may be my uncle. And if that's true, this is bigger than either of us thought." Ramirez's eyes hardened. "Which means he won't stop until he gets that drive." That night, while Grace slept curled beside her brother, Alexander sat alone in the living room. Snow tapped softly against the window. He held the USB drive in his hand, its plastic casing cool and deceptively ordinary. Inside was the proof that could topple his company, expose corruption, and destroy the last remnants of the family he had left. But without it, more children like Daniel might die, more families shattered. He closed his eyes, hearing Grace's voice echo, "Will you be our family?" The choice had already been made. He tucked the USB safely into a hidden compartment in his briefcase. But just as he stood, his phone buzzed again. A new text, chilling in its simplicity. "You're protecting them like they're your own. But you can't protect them forever. Blood runs thicker than promises. And blood always wins." His hand trembled, the device glowing like an omen in the dark. The Safehouse felt different after Agent Ramirez spoke his uncle's name. Charles Reed, the man who had raised him after the fire that claimed his parents. The man who had guided him through college, who taught him how to play chess and how to negotiate with sharks in the boardroom. The man he trusted as family when family was all he had left. Now, that same man's name was stamped across the conspiracy that had already taken Grace and Daniel's parents and nearly burned the three of them alive. Alexander stared at his reflection in the Safehouse bathroom mirror. His jaw was tight, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "Uncle Charles? No, it can't be." But the evidence was mounting, and in his gut, he knew. The next day, Alexander sat across from Ramirez at the kitchen table. The kids were in the next room coloring, their laughter a faint reminder of innocence. Ramirez opened her laptop and slid it toward him. "We've traced more of the offshore transfers. They all route back to Titan Holdings, Cayman Islands. Charles Reed is listed as a silent partner, hidden through layers of shell companies." Alexander's mouth went dry. "He told me he retired. Said he wanted to spend his golden years away from the business." Ramirez's tone was sharp. He never retired. He's been pulling strings from the shadows, using Hayes as his enforcer. If what you found on that USB goes public, he loses everything. That makes you, and those children, prime targets. Alexander pushed the laptop away, pinching the bridge of his nose. You're telling me the man who raised me murdered their father? And maybe... His voice faltered. Maybe even mine? Ramirez hesitated. We can't prove it yet. But there were irregularities in the fire report. From your parents' house. He froze. That old wound, buried for decades, ripped open again. What irregularities? Accelerant traces that were never explained. A faulty wiring explanation that never matched the photos. The investigator in charge retired abruptly after filing the report. Alexander's hands curled into fists. Memories of that night came rushing back, the smell of smoke, the blinding flames, the sound of his mother screaming his name as he and Charles stumbled out of the collapsing house. Charles had held him tight, telling him there was nothing they could do, that his parents were already gone, that tragedy had chosen him, and he had to move forward. Had it all been a lie? That evening, Grace tugged on his sleeve as he sat silently in the living room. You look sad, she said softly. He forced a smile. Just thinking. She tilted her head. About your sister? He swallowed. About my family. Grace climbed into his lap, setting her drawing on his knee. It was another stick figure sketch, this one of a tall man with 2 children beside him. Above their heads, she had scrawled one word, in big uneven letters. Family. Her eyes searched his. Does family always hurt you? The question struck him like a blow. Not always, he whispered. Sometimes family saves you. Sometimes they're the only reason you keep fighting. She leaned her head against his chest. Then maybe we can be the saving kind. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them back. He kissed the top of her hair and whispered, Yes, Grace. That's exactly what we'll be. Later that night, when the house was quiet, Alexander slipped into the study Agent Ramirez had converted into a workspace. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through old photographs, family gatherings, company dinners, press clippings. There was Charles in every one, smiling, always at his side, always whispering advice, and suddenly it all felt sinister. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert, his head of security. Boss, we've been digging, found something, need to show you in person. Within the hour, Robert arrived at the Safehouse. His normally stoic face was grim. He set a manila folder on the desk. This is from a contact in Chicago PD. Unofficial. If I'm right, your uncle didn't just cover up fraud. He engineered your entire life. Alexander opened the folder. His breath caught. Inside were photocopies of the original fire investigation, photos of the charred house. And in one of them, barely visible in the corner, was a metal device attached to the gas line. A timer. Jesus, Alexander whispered. Robert's voice was low. That wasn't faulty wiring, Alex. That was arson. Someone set that fire intentionally. And based on the timing device, it was planned days in advance. Alexander stared at the image until the lines blurred. His parents hadn't died by accident. They had been murdered. And the man who had pulled him from the flames, the man who had raised him, was the same man who lit the match. Why? Alexander whispered. Why would he do that? Robert hesitated. Maybe because your father wasn't willing to play his game. Maybe because Charles needed you alone, dependent on him. He shaped you, Alex. Molded you into exactly what he wanted. A ruthless CEO, ready to carry his empire forward. Alexander's chest heaved. Rage. Grief. Betrayal, they all collided until he could barely breathe. His whole life, every decision, every triumph, built on lies and blood. The next morning, Alexander stood in the snowy yard of the Safehouse, watching Grace and Daniel chase each other slowly, their laughter rising in white clouds of breath. For a moment, it felt like a normal family scene. But he knew better. Danger lurked in every shadow. Ramirez stepped outside, hands in her coat pockets. "You okay?" "No," he said honestly. She studied him. "You've got a choice, Alex. We can keep you hidden, keep the kids in protective custody, and build the case slowly. Or you can confront this head-on and risk everything." He turned to her, his jaw set. "If I hide, Charles keeps winning. He killed my parents. He killed Grace's. He tried to kill us. If I don't stop him, he'll destroy everything I care about." Ramirez's eyes hardened. "Then we'll go after him. But you need to understand this won't be clean. He has power, money, connections. And if he really orchestrated your rise, then exposing him means tearing down your own company with him." Alexander looked back at the children, Grace helping Daniel to his feet after he stumbled in the snow. "Then so be it," he said. "Some things matter more than money. This ends with him." That night, he sat beside Grace as she drifted to sleep. Her small hand clutched his sleeve, as if afraid he'd vanish in the dark. "Mr. Reed?" she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart? Are we safe now?" He hesitated, his throat tightening. He wanted to tell her yes. He wanted to promise her the monsters were gone. But instead, he whispered, "Not yet. But we will be. I promise." She nodded sleepily, trusting him completely. That trust was a weight heavier than any fortune he had ever carried. When she finally closed her eyes, he sat in the dark, staring at the flicker of the hallway light, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Because for the first time in his life, Alexander Reed wasn't just fighting for power or reputation or legacy. He was fighting for family. And the man he had once called uncle, the man he had once loved, was the ghost he'd have to destroy to save them. As the snowstorm raged outside the Safehouse, his phone buzzed again. A new message, short and cruel. "You found the truth. Good. Now decide. Hand over the drive, or bury those kids next to their parents." Alexander stared at the screen, fury burning through his veins. For years, Charles Reed had orchestrated his life like a puppet master. But this time, Alexander swore the strings would be cut. The storm had calmed by evening, leaving Madison's streets glazed in ice. But inside Alexander Reed, a different kind of storm, raged a fury that had been building since the day his parents' house went up in flames. For hours he paced the Safehouse living room, unable to sit still. Grace watched him with worried eyes. Daniel curled against her side. She finally whispered, "You're scaring me." Alexander stopped, forcing himself to breathe. He knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. "I'm sorry, Grace. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at someone who's been lying to me my whole life. Someone who hurt my family and yours." She searched his face with a kind of childlike wisdom. "Then you have to stop him." The words hit with the clarity of truth. Yes. Hiding wasn't enough. Running wasn't enough. Charles Reed wouldn't stop until Alexander was dead, and the children were silenced. There was only one way to end it. That night, Alexander left the Safehouse under cover of darkness. He promised Grace he'd return, promised Daniel he'd read the dinosaur book again. He told them he'd keep them safe. He meant every word, though his heart felt heavier than ever. The FBI had set up an operation to bring Charles down. But Alexander knew his uncle too well. Charles wouldn't go quietly. He thrived on control. If this ended, it would end face to face. Reed Tower loomed over the Chicago skyline as Alexander's car pulled up. 47 stories of steel and glass. The monument to everything he'd built, or thought he'd built. In truth, it was Charles's empire all along. The lobby was deserted. Security cleared out under the FBI's orders. The silence was eerie, broken only by the echo of Alexander's footsteps as he entered the elevator. He swiped his keycard, the doors sliding shut, carrying him upward toward the executive floor. The ride felt endless. Every floor ticked by like a countdown to judgment. By the time the doors opened, his chest was tight, his palms damp. The executive suite was dark, except for the glow of Chicago's skyline through the glass walls. And there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, with a glass of scotch in hand, was Charles Reed. "Alexander," his uncle said smoothly, turning with a smile that chilled him. "I wondered how long it would take before you came to me." Alexander's fists clenched. "Cut the act. I know what you did. The fraud, the shell companies, the fire, my parents." Charles raised a hand, calm as ever. "Careful, nephew. Anger makes you sloppy." He walked slowly to the desk, setting down his glass. "I did what needed to be done. Your father was weak. He would have kept Reed Technologies a boutique shop forever. No contracts, no growth, no legacy. So I gave the world what it demanded. And I gave you the push you needed to become great." Alexander's voice shook with rage. "You murdered them. I shaped you." Charles corrected coldly. "Every scar, every loss, every ounce of drive, it made you who you are. The youngest self-made billionaire in the country. Without me, you'd still be that scared little boy watching his sister die." Alexander's throat tightened. "You let Sarah die." Charles's eyes glimmered. "Or did I?" For a heartbeat, Alexander thought he had misheard. "What are you talking about?" Charles's smile widened. "Not everything is as it seems, Alex. Some sacrifices are permanent. Others can be useful. You'll learn the truth soon enough." Before Alexander could press him, the office door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons raised. "Charles Reed! Step away from the desk." Charles didn't flinch. He calmly reached into his jacket and drew a pistol, pointing it not at the agents, but at Alexander. The room froze. "Uncle, don't," Alexander warned, raising his hand slightly. Charles's tone was almost tender. "I taught you everything, Alex. Strategy, patience, ruthlessness. But I see now, you've grown soft. Those children, that girl's eyes have weakened you, and weakness has no place in this family." "Family?" Alexander spat. "You don't know the meaning of the word." Charles's smile faltered, replaced by cold fury. "Then I'll show you what family means." He cocked the gun. The agents shouted, "Drop it! Drop the weapon!" But Charles's gaze never left Alexander. In that moment, Alex saw it. The man who had played father, mentor, and executioner all at once. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid. "You won't touch them," Alexander said, voice steady. "Grace and Daniel are under my protection. You want them? You go through me." Charles sneered. "Then I'll bury you next to your parents." He raised the gun. A single deafening shot cracked the air. For a heartbeat, Alexander thought he had been hit. But then, Charles staggered, blood blooming across his shoulder. An FBI agent had fired first. Chaos erupted. Agents swarmed, forcing Charles to the ground, cuffing his hands as he cursed and shouted about legacy and betrayal. Alexander stood frozen, his chest heaving, watching the man who had raised him dragged away like a common criminal. But even as they pulled Charles to his feet, he laughed. A chilling, broken sound. "You think this is over?" he rasped. "This is bigger than me. You'll see. The bloodline always wins." They hauled him out, his laughter echoing through the halls. Hours later, the tower was quiet again. Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at the skyline. His company, his empire, his very identity felt shattered. Everything he had believed about his family, about his life, was a lie. The door creaked open, Agent Ramirez stepped inside, her face pale. It's done. Charles is in custody. We've got enough evidence to bury him. Alexander didn't respond. He kept his eyes on the city lights. Ramirez hesitated, then added, "But there's something else you need to know. When we searched his safe, we found files, medical records, adoption papers, and a name." Alexander turned slowly. "What name?" Her eyes locked on his. "Sarah Reed." The room tilted. He gripped the edge of the desk. "That's not possible. Sarah died. I buried her." Ramirez shook her head. "Your uncle faked her death. He switched medical charts, paid off doctors. According to these files, she's alive. She was moved to a private facility in Canada, and based on recent documents," she took a deep breath, "she may be in Chicago right now." Alexander's heart slammed against his ribs. Alive. His little sister, the one whose death had haunted him for 20 years. If it was true, everything changed. He staggered toward Ramirez, his voice a whisper. "Where is she?" Ramirez handed him a photo. A blurry surveillance still of a woman leaving a bus station. Her face partly obscured, but unmistakable. Older, worn by years, but her eyes. Those same dark eyes. Sarah. Alexander sank into the chair, the photo trembling in his hands. His uncle's words echoed in his mind. Not everything is as it seems. If Sarah was alive, why had Charles hidden her? What had he done to her all these years? The thought made his blood run cold. Ramirez placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find her. I promise." "Who?" But Alexander barely heard. He was staring at the photo, heart hammering, 1,000 questions tearing through him. His sister was alive. And if that was true, then everything, his grief, his drive, his empire had been built on a lie deeper than he ever imagined. The photo lay on Alexander's desk, like a ghost come back to life. Sarah. Older, yes. Worn, yes. But those eyes, he knew them anywhere. Eyes he had seen fade in a hospital bed all those years ago. Eyes that had haunted his dreams with guilt. Agent Ramirez's voice broke through his shock. "The surveillance still was captured last week at a bus terminal on the south side. We've been combing the area, but so far, no confirmed address." Alexander's hands trembled as he traced the blurred image. All this time, she wasn't dead. Ramirez nodded carefully. "Your uncle faked the records. Why? We don't know yet. But she was alive. Hidden. Alive." The word felt impossible, and yet undeniable. Alexander's chest ached with a mix of fury and hope. Charles had stolen not only his parents, but his sister too, erasing her, rewriting their history. And now, after 2 decades of grief, she was here. Somewhere in Chicago. The Safehouse felt suffocating that night. Grace and Daniel slept soundly in their room. But Alexander couldn't. He sat in the living room, staring at the flickering glow of the fireplace. Grace's drawing still lay on the mantel. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath the word family. He clenched his fists, whispering, "If Sarah's alive, I'll find her. I'll bring her back. I swear it." The next morning, Agent Ramirez called with news. "We got a lead. A nurse at a private clinic on the south side recognized Sarah's photo. Said she came in a month ago for treatment under the name Emily Carson. We'll head there today." Alexander didn't hesitate. "I'm coming." "Alex," Ramirez warned, but he cut her off. "She's my sister. I lost her once. I won't lose her again." The clinic was a run-down brick building, tucked between shuttered shops. Ramirez's team secured the perimeter, while Alexander waited in the SUV, his pulse hammering like a war drum. Finally, Ramirez appeared at the door, motioning him forward. "She's here." Alexander's legs felt heavy as he climbed out. Each step toward the clinic door was a step into the past. His mind raced with memories: Sarah's laugh, her cough, the way she clutched his hand when she was too weak to sit up. He pushed the door open, and there she was, sitting on a worn couch in the waiting area, a blanket over her lap. Her hair was longer, streaked with gray. Her face was thinner, lined with years he hadn't been there to witness. But her eyes, oh God, her eyes were the same. She looked up. For a moment, confusion flickered. Then recognition hit. "Alex?" she whispered. The sound of her voice shattered him. He stumbled forward, tears blurring his vision. "Sarah." She rose slowly, uncertain, as if afraid he was an illusion. But when he pulled her into his arms, she collapsed against him, sobbing. For the first time in 20 years, Alexander held his sister, and the dam inside him broke. They sat together in the clinic office, the door closed while Ramirez gave them space. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched a paper cup of tea. "I thought you were dead," Alexander whispered, his throat raw. "I almost was," Sarah said softly. "But Uncle Charles, he didn't let me die. Not because he loved me, because he needed me." Alexander's stomach churned. "What did he do to you?" She stared into her tea. "When the doctors said the treatments weren't working, I overheard Uncle Charles arguing with Dad. Dad wanted to try experimental therapy. Uncle Charles said it was a waste, that it would ruin the family finances. That night, there was a fight. And the next morning, Uncle Charles told me I had to leave. He said he'd arranged for special care in Canada, but it wasn't treatment, it was isolation. He moved me to a private facility, paid the doctors to falsify my death certificate, and told the world I was gone." Alexander's hands tightened into fists. Why? Because as long as I existed, I was a reminder of his lies. He told me I was too fragile, that the world had to think I was dead. For years I was kept hidden, moved from clinic to clinic. He said he was protecting me, but really he was protecting himself. And when I got older, when I started asking questions, the threats began. If I ever tried to contact you, he'd hurt you. He said he made you into the man you are, and he wouldn't let me undo that. Alexander's breath shook. All these years, I grieved you. I built my life on your loss. And he sat there, watching, knowing the truth. Sarah reached for his hand. "You didn't fail me, Alex." He did. "But we're here now. We survived." Tears burned his eyes. He clutched her hand, whispering, "Never again. He'll never touch us again." That night, back at the Safehouse, Grace and Daniel met Sarah for the first time. Grace tilted her head curiously, studying the woman with the tired smile. "You're Mr. Reed's sister?" Grace asked. Sarah nodded. "That's right." Grace's eyes widened. "Then that makes you kind of like our aunt." Sarah laughed softly, the sound rusty, but warm. "If you'll have me." Daniel peeked from behind Grace's shoulder, clutching his toy dinosaur. "Do you read stories?" Sarah's eyes shimmered. "I used to. Would you like me to read to you?" The boy nodded, and soon Sarah was curled on the couch with both children pressed against her, a picture book open in her lap. Grace leaned against her side, Daniel's small head nestled under her arm. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching the scene with a lump in his throat. His sister, alive. The children, safe for now. For a moment, the world felt whole again. But peace was fleeting. Later, when the kids were asleep, Sarah sat with Alexander in the kitchen. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "There's something you need to know," she said, "about the Millers, about Grace and Daniel's father." Alexander froze. "What about him?" Sarah swallowed. "When I was in that facility in Canada, I wasn't alone. There were other patients. One of them was Thomas Miller." The air left his lungs. "Grace's father?" She nodded. He told me he worked for Reed Technologies, that he had discovered dangerous flaws in one of the projects. He suspected people at the top were covering it up. He wanted to expose it, but he said someone was watching him, someone inside the family. Alexander's blood ran cold. Charles. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thomas was terrified. He said if anything happened to him, his children would be targets. He asked me to remember their names, Grace and Daniel. He said someday they might need help. Alexander leaned back, stunned. The pieces were falling into place. The USB, the accident, the fire. Thomas Miller had been silenced, just like their parents. And Sarah had carried his secret all along. She gripped his hand. Alex, those kids aren't just your responsibility because you saved them. They're tied to all of this. To him. To us. To us. He closed his eyes, the weight crushing him. Grace's trust. Daniel's fragile hope. Sarah's survival. They were all threads in the same web Charles had spun. And now, with Charles in custody but his network still at large, the danger was far from over. The following day, Ramirez briefed them on the next steps. Charles was in federal holding, but his associates were still free. The conspiracy stretched wider than they'd thought. Military contracts, offshore accounts, political payoffs. We have enough to keep him behind bars, Ramirez said. But his people will move fast. They'll try to tie up loose ends. That means you, Sarah. And the kids are still targets. Alexander's jaw hardened. Then we end it. Not just Charles. All of it. Ramirez studied him. That's not just a legal battle, Alex. That's war. He glanced at Grace and Daniel, then at Sarah. Then war is what they'll get. That night, as the snow fell silently outside, Sarah sat beside Grace's bed, humming softly. Grace stirred, half asleep, whispering, "Don't leave us." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Never again, sweetheart." Across the hall, Alexander stared out the window at the quiet street, the weight of destiny pressing on him. For years he thought he was alone, a man forged by tragedy. But now he understood. His family hadn't been destroyed. It had been stolen, and piece by piece, he was taking it back. But deep down, he knew Charles was right about one thing. This was bigger than one man, and the next move would decide whether they lived free or died as pawns in his uncle's game. Snow lashed against the windows of the Safehouse, a storm hammering Madison like a warning from the sky. Inside, Alexander Reed stood at the window, his reflection fractured by icy streaks. Sarah sat at the table, Grace curled against her side, Daniel asleep in her lap. The fragile piece they had built was a candle flickering in a gale. His phone buzzed. A single text. "This ends tonight." Alexander's gut tightened. He turned to Robert, who stood guard near the door. "They're coming." Robert's jaw clenched. "Then we hold the line." Before the words settled, headlights swept across the snow outside. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop. Shadows spilled from the vehicle's armed men, moving with military precision. Alexander's chest burned with rage. Charles's network. The bloodline refusing to let go. "Get them to the basement," Alexander barked. "Now!" Sarah clutched Grace and Daniel, guiding them quickly toward the hidden stairwell. Grace's eyes were wide with terror. "Mr. Reed, don't go." He crouched, brushing her hair back. "I'll be right behind you. But I have to keep you safe. Trust me." She nodded, tears brimming. "I trust you." The words gave him strength. He rose, grabbed the pistol Robert handed him, and faced the storm. The first window shattered. Gunfire ripped through the living room. Alexander ducked behind the couch, firing back. Robert and 2 marshals returned fire, holding the attackers at bay. "Basement secure," Sarah shouted from below. But the men outside weren't stopping. They circled the house, their assault relentless. Alexander's mind sharpened, his heart steady. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Sarah, for Grace, for Daniel, for every lie Charles had carved into their lives. Bullets chewed through plaster. One marshal went down with a cry. Robert pulled him to cover, swearing, "They'll breach in minutes." "Then we don't give them minutes," Alexander snapped. He grabbed a flashbang from Robert's vest. "Cover me." Before Robert could argue, Alexander hurled the device through the broken window. The blast lit the snow like lightning, screams erupting from outside as attackers staggered, blinded. Alexander vaulted through the window into the storm. The icy air seared his lungs, but fury kept him warm. He tackled the nearest man, slamming his fist into the attacker's jaw until the crunch of bone silenced him. Another lunged with a knife Alexander twisted, driving his elbow into the man's throat. For years he had fought only in boardrooms, his weapons contracts and mergers. Tonight, he fought like the boy who had lost everything in fire and blood. By the time the FBI reinforcements arrived, the yard was littered with broken bodies. Survivors dropped their weapons as Ramirez's agents swarmed in, cuffing them, reading rights over the howl of wind. Ramirez found Alexander kneeling in the snow, chest heaving, blood streaking his knuckles. "Alex, are you?" "I'm fine," he rasped. "The kids, Sarah, they're safe?" "Safe," she confirmed. "It's over." But Alexander shook his head. "Not yet. Not until Charles is buried for good." Note. The trial came swift. Charles Reed, shackled in federal court, glared at Alexander from across the room. The charges filled pages: fraud, conspiracy, murder. But the most damning evidence was the testimony of Sarah Reed. She stood on the witness stand, voice trembling but strong, recounting the years of captivity, the threats, the lies. She looked her brother in the eye as she said, "He stole my life, but he couldn't kill the truth." Grace and Daniel sat in the gallery with Alexander, their small hands clutching his. They listened as history was rewritten, as the weight of lies crumbled under the light of truth. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Charles's mask cracked. As marshals dragged him away, he spat. "This isn't the end, Alex. The bloodline doesn't die with me." Alexander didn't flinch. He held Sarah's gaze, then looked down at the children. "It already has." Months passed. Spring bloomed in Chicago, melting the snow into rivers that carried away the last stains of winter. Alexander moved into a quieter home on the outskirts of the city. Nothing grand, nothing towering, just a place with a yard where children could laugh without fear. Sarah lived with them, her strength returning each day. She read to Grace and Daniel at night, her laughter filling the house like music long lost. Grace thrived in school, her stubborn courage blossoming into leadership. Daniel's treatments continued, but his color was better, his smile brighter. Each small victory felt like a miracle. One evening, Alexander sat on the porch, watching the children chase fireflies. Sarah joined him, her face serene. "You know," she said softly, "for so long, I thought family was just something I lost. But now, I see it's something you fight for, something you build." Alexander nodded, eyes glistening. "And something worth dying for. But we're not dying. Not anymore." Grace's laughter rang through the twilight as she caught a firefly in her cupped hands, running toward him. "Look, Mr. Reed, it's glowing just for us." He lifted her into his lap, gazing at the tiny light flickering between her fingers. Daniel toddled over, climbing onto Sarah's knee. For the first time, Alexander felt peace, not the hollow peace of wealth or power, but the real kind, born of love and survival. As the sun sank below the horizon, Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes, sweetheart? Are we really a family now?" His throat tightened. He looked at Sarah, then at the children, then at the fireflies swirling in the dusk. "Yes," he whispered, his voice steady with truth. We're a family. Always. And in that moment, surrounded by the people he had nearly lost but finally found, Alexander Reed knew he had won the only legacy that mattered. Not towers, not contracts, not bloodlines twisted by greed, but love. This story carries a weight far beyond its twists of betrayal, survival, and redemption. At its core, it speaks to one of the deepest human truths. Family is not only defined by blood, but by choice, by the willingness to protect, nurture, and sacrifice for one another. In a world often obsessed with wealth, status, and legacy, Alexander's journey reminds us that none of those things hold meaning if love and compassion are absent. His empire, once a monument to ambition, becomes irrelevant compared to the fragile hand of a child clutching his own for safety. For audiences, especially adults who have carried their own share of grief, responsibility, or regret, the story resonates because it mirrors the struggles of real life. The loss of loved ones, the weight of past mistakes, and the unexpected opportunities for healing. Sarah's endurance reflects the silent strength of countless people who suffer unseen, yet still carry hope. Grace's bravery embodies the resilience of children forced to grow up too quickly. Daniel's fight against illness is a symbol of fragile innocence that deserves protection. What the story ultimately teaches is that love is the greatest wealth and trust the strongest bond. It asks us to question our own priorities. Are we building lives that matter, or are we chasing shadows of success? It shows that redemption is possible even after decades of being misled, and that choosing to love, to step in, to take responsibility when we don't have to, can rewrite destinies. The value of this tale lies in its reminder that every act of compassion, no matter how small, has the power to heal wounds that money, power, and ambition could never touch. In the end, true richness is not in empires built, but in lives saved, families formed, and love that endures.